It's the work of Stuart Cairns. Stuart Cairns is a silversmith by training. He graduated from the University of Ulster in the year 2000 in silversmiths and applied arts. And he also then went back a little later and did his MA there as well. And so he has a variety of forms of practice. Certainly some of his jewellery, his silverware you'll find in the cabinet here, but you also are looking at an installation of ongoing work that has been produced over the past year. And it's one of 10 exhibitions that he's produced during 2015. And for the reason for that, we'll come to in a moment or two. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with Stuart's work before now, in that you'll have seen it in places like the Royal Ulster Academy. This year he was one of the invited artists, and he had a very nice piece with a number of his beautifully constructed utensils or implements framed under glass there. He's exhibited in joint shows throughout Northern Ireland for the past 15 years, and he's also exhibited in joint exhibitions to do with making in places such as the Saatchi Gallery in 2010 and also the Victoria and Albert Museum in 2012. And he has future exhibitions lined up in places further afield, such as Stockholm, I think, in the near future. He's a really skilled craftsman who likes to use a variety of different materials. Now, the exhibition itself is called Driftlines, or if you look at his website, which is also a work of art in its own right, look, he refers to it as tide lines, because he's fascinated with found materials, found objects, not just natural materials, but also man-made materials. And even if you're sort of looking along at this beautiful table, which is almost like a sort of a tide line itself, you know, the type of thing you find washed up on the beach. You've got a variety of materials that are natural, such as things like brackens and grasses, wheat. We've got beautiful twigs. There are stones with minerals running through them. There's hints of him looking at things like maybe lichens for coloration. But alongside that, you'll also have man-made objects that he has picked up on his walks. And somebody said yesterday, this is another one of these journeys, another one of these walks. And yes, it is, because what you're really looking at is a sort of visual diary of the types of things that he sees. Because when he goes for a walk, as we all do, he's looking around him all the time, but he is picking up on things that most of us just walk past, and he collects them. So alongside the natural materials, you'll see found materials. So there are things like their little curly grips.
But he seems terribly interested in the delicate.
Very delicate, and the way displaying becomes exceptionally important to him. So things with little paper clips there, things that you would throw away. Or say if we come up here, there are, on this little level here, this looks like a series of things like based on buckles perhaps. Maybe a buckle or an aperture that you'd find perhaps in a stone wall. But then when you look at them more carefully, you begin to realise that although some of them are natural materials, some of them are combined with man-made materials. And the materials he likes in particular, he likes linen thread, because it comes from a natural material, of course, but he can then bind things with it. And he uses it to bind the natural materials with man-made materials such as steel, and especially silver. And sometimes it's actually quite difficult to see which is the steel and which is the silver. You know, you've really got to look very carefully as to whether it's been polished or whether it's been textured or given a verdigris to make it look as if it is aged. So you have a variety of different little objects placed together. And all of his work has been along these sort of lines of combining the found with the man-made. The idea of it being like a drift line, therefore, it gives you a suggestion that it's things that he's found by accident. But of course, it's not just that he's looking for them. He likes certain shapes and certain forms. There's a certain, he must have boxes at home, like a lot of us have, or sheds, or places where, you know, sort of we have this box of similar objects, or we've got a file on our computer of similar images, and every along the way we say we'll do something with that. And we don't, but he does. So there are certain repetitive forms. He likes elongated, very delicate verticals. He likes container shapes, things like circles or little box-like shapes. And the way that he displays them makes linkages for that. I mean, if you're actually looking at them here, I think the display is as much a part of the artwork as the individual objects or artifacts. And they are really quite exquisitely constructed. If you look at, say, this grouping here, this I'm assuming is in silver. We've then got some that might be in silver or perhaps in metal. There's this little piece here that apes the shapes of maybe deconstructed paper clips, but you're not quite sure what it is. Then there are little objects here that almost looks like an implement, but it also looks like a large paper clip that has been unwound and deconstructed and made into something else. So he's playing very elegantly all the time, whether it's with circles, what looks like a little napkin ring, or a little circle that might be something like an earring or part of a working object that he's deconstructed. And then a little circle of metal which he's bound beautifully onto just a piece of twig. So that it's a really interesting sort of sense of construction. All the work that I've seen of his over the years shows that he's interested in utensils. He's interested in things like tableware. And if you think of the etiquette of tableware, the way that on a really beautiful formal table, everything is laid out. You've got the soup spoons and the fish cutlery and the dessert spoons in there, and everything is laid out absolutely precisely. And then look at the way that everything is laid out here. There's that sort of sense of structure and order. And he is interested in the way that sort of tableware and utensils have a very long history, moving from things like the wooden materials up to more precious materials of gold and silver. And that I think sort of informs his practice all the way through his career. So somebody yesterday was asking, when you sort of look at, say, something like this, here you have an implement that is made and bound together out of maybe a number of different other objects that he's constructed. So if you wanted to pick that up, can I pick that up? If you want to pick that up, you'll actually see that it's made out of different types of metal that are bound together with coloured linen thread. And it almost looks like as if it has been a scoop at some stage, but it doesn't work anymore, but there's a remnant of it there.
One of those things for blowing bubbles.
or a different use. Put it back where he had it. But the one next to it is simply a square made out of metal, which looks like, again, a pin that's been opened up and reconstructed, and then a twig. So you're almost looking at two different implements there, but you get the hint that you've put them together and have another implement. And I think he's fascinated with that. One of the things he has that is sort of a repetitive thread going through his website is that he's interested in when is an object complete? When is an artifact complete? If you're making something, when do you know it's finished? Or what does it purpose? Or as you're going along with it, sometimes its purpose might shift. You know, something that is broken, we tend to discard, but you could actually transform it into something else. So there's an investigation all the way through this. It's playful, but it's also incredibly elegant. The use of natural form brings to mind people like Andy Goldsworthy, who I'm sure you've come across before. The Scottish Borders-based artist Goldsworthy, who uses natural materials that he collects on a daily basis in the countryside. And his pieces are made out of things like leaves or water or twigs or whatever. And very often the objects are made on site and they're then left there to decay. And the only record of them is if he's been there or somebody's seen him make it, or he takes a photograph of it so that you have that sort of record. And there is an affinity, I think, with Goldsworthy's work in Stuart Cairns' pieces, in that he's using beautiful things like, dried grasses and bracken and leaves And sort of what all of these almost look like these are pieces that come off maybe a pampas grass or something like that. But he's then making them into these exquisite objects, so that there's a hint of sort of origami here as well. You know, so that there's a Japanese feel to it. And also I think, you know, looking at it yesterday, even the way that it's displayed, you could see this being very, very popular in a Japanese setting with their sense of order, construction and balance. These are really beautiful little woven baskets made out of leaves. And we were sort of contemplating yesterday as to how he actually does it. No, I don't know, but we guessed. And some of the guesses that we were coming up with was that he must, through obviously trial and error, be aware that maybe the materials are damp to begin with as he's collecting them, and whether he has maybe something like a mould that he then puts them around, and as it slowly dries he can remove them. But some of them, especially say along the top here in the glass cabinet, there's a sort of like a beaker made out of beautiful leaves. You wonder maybe, you know, there's elements of grease or perhaps a sort of a lubricant so that we can pull it out without breaking them. They also remind me of things like, you know, corn doilies. Again, if you think that you're going back into sort of old traditions of making, going back into sort of customs that are long gone. The idea of making a corn doily at a particular time of year to celebrate the passing of the seasons or a saint's day or something like that. I mean, they really are absolutely exquisite. Some of the pieces really sort of, you can see his process of thought. He's got, when you look at these little pins, some of them look like real Kirby grips, sort of bobby pins, or whatever you might want to call them. And then as you're looking at them, you're not quite sure whether are they found objects or has he made them with materials to look like this, and they become more complex as they move along. There's something sort of maybe medical about them as well. Things like tweezers or sort of implements for fishing things out. And then it becomes more complex. And just that beautiful piece of metal there, but it's also then within those shapes, it almost looks like a razor blade. You know, there are all sorts of connotations.
I presume he would have planned the layout beforehand. He wouldn't have just brought a big box of stuff and started putting it out.
Yeah, he did plan them.
It's planned, yes. I mean, again, if you look at the website, you'll see the website he updates very regularly, so that you can actually see his process of thought on the website as well, and you'll see some of these objects in different groupings, so that he obviously knows exactly where he wants, and it's the spacings. So that is definitely a little group there. A little group there balanced by the vertical piece in the middle there, and similarly that balances it as well. You've got a set of three, a larger set, and an elongated piece. And there are all sorts of analogies. I mean, you sort of link even sort of the greens and the minerals, and the way that it runs through the stone picks up on the types of textures that you've got on the metal circle on the other side. So that it is very, very carefully constructed, the whole thing. And it also then relates to some really quite exquisite pieces in the cabinet as well. He makes jewellery, and he will work to commission, but he will also make sort of jewellery pieces such as rings, etc. And in the second shelf down, there's a really magnificent necklace, which is almost like a sort of totemic piece, which if you look at it carefully, begin to look at the number of materials in that. The necklace itself on a linen thread is made up what looks like thorns taken off a rose bush, but attached to each of the thorns again is what looks like a little red stalk off another plant, which is adhered to that. And then hanging from the necklace, you've got a number of sort of totemic images that look like shells or a distressed bottle top, the type of thing you'd find thrown up on a beach. There's a bit of bone, there's also a fishing hook. You know, there's just a really exquisite selection of things put together to make something really quite, really sort of adventurous in character. And then at the bottom, when you're looking at it, I mean, there's a beautiful selection of things. There's a bit of seaweed. There's a little piece of sort of dried vegetation, then little bits of yellow plastic thread, what looks like some circular shapes, a very large distressed looking paper clip continuing on, and then just a little pile of what looks like fishing line and hooks, the type of thing that you'd find by a riverbank or in a rock pool. And those things are also then scattered all the way around the room. Because this exhibition is not just about the finished pieces, it's about his working method, it's about his practice.
But do I assume that the jewellery makes this for display purposes, it's not for practical purposes?
I think it's also for practical purposes.
Because you couldn't wear that. Sure you couldn't.
Might do. You never know.
So
Unlike. The exhibition is called Place and Process, with the subtitle of Driftlines. And really what it does is it shows you his working method. What you have along the entrance and the back wall here are quite large-scale photographs, which includes some of the objects that you see here that have been isolated and photographed together. Some have been taken from the exhibition space and actually placed maybe in the landscape where the ideas came from. So there's a nice one above Dillis there on a rock with some, just a very long, beautiful twig on it. And the shadows that he can incorporate in the photographs and in the display become part of it as well. Some of the works that he displays, he floats on steel pins from a backing so that when the light catches it, you get additional shadowing to give you sort of a sense of depth. And again, it depends on the sunlight here as to how much you can get the shadowing in the display like this. But the photographs are beautiful in that they show you the type of landscape, the places that catch his eye. And he takes photographs all the time. And you can see that particularly on the three banks here with these little tiny photographs. And this is very much the type of thing you'll find on his website as well. I like the way that the photograph also has been cut down even more, so you've got this repetitive sort of Polaroid top and bottom. So it's things like old fireplaces, or again, a nice little set of images of artefacts placed side by side, so you've got a bouncing all the way through of his actual artefacts. But then a very Goldsworthy-like image here of what looks like sort of maybe lichens or leaves floating on water, or a single leaf, or frosted bracken. All of these little images that you see here in each of the displays is really his idea bank. This is what he collects all the time, and he will play with things as he goes along, transforming them then into this really rather splendid display. You also then have on the back wall a really beautiful set of very elegant, quite minimal watercolours, which are both based on the artefacts that he makes, but also maybe ideas for artefacts that he will make. I'm not quite sure what the process is, but I'm assuming that happens sort of concurrently. So here you have these really beautiful watercolours, which sort of bleed into the paper. Again, even the display of it, I think with the bulldog clips and the way it's hung, is very carefully organised. So that your eye sort of bounces across it because of the colour and shapes and forms. And this is something also that, there's a hint here of Goldsworthy. Andy Goldsworthy produces really beautiful watercolours using water from things like icicles or snowballs that he has maybe rolled during winter. Because when you roll a snowball, you pick up mud and twigs and things on the ground. And with Goldsworthy, what he does is that once that snowball is melted, the water is then coloured naturally, and he will paint with that. Or sometimes it will just be an icicle or some water that he allows simply to bleed into the paper, and you have an abstract form, which he then sometimes draws over. But you have that sort of fluidity and the softness of the colour. The colours are really beautiful, natural colours and earth colours that really give it a sense of delicacy. So as a body of work, I think it is really beautiful. It is an installation. This would work on its own, these would work on its own, but it's actually better when you've got them all together.
Those are nice because they're all both in format, they're vertical.
Yes.
And also the images are mostly
Everything seems to be vertical. Yes. It's not as rigidly horizontal as these ones. This has a bit more organic feel, but you get that sort of verticality, and they're beautifully arrayed. Robert, I was going to say, did you organise that, or did he do that?
Stuart's idea.
So Stuart has overall control of how he wants everything to look. And certainly on his website you will see glimpses of other exhibitions, and you can see it developing. That this is his presentation, it's his style. Now, the reason for having the process displayed here alongside the finished artefacts, it comes from a really particularly important event. This has been funded by the Rosie James Memorial Fund, or Memorial Trust. And this is a new venture. Rosie James, or Rosemary James, was born in the mid-1940s. I'm not sure exactly when, just mid-1940s, and she died in 2010. And she, from 1966 to 1971, she studied textile design at the Belfast College of Art. And she decided, obviously, maybe to leave Northern Ireland. And after she graduated, she went to Bristol, first of all, to teach. And then she gravitated to Cambridge, where I think she spent most of her life teaching art and design. She died in 2010. We were talking about this yesterday, and you said she'd never married. We found out a bit more about her. She never married, she had no children. And she left a sum of money to Northern Ireland, to the Arts Council to administer and to connect with makers in Northern Ireland. And the sum that she left is phenomenal. She left over £500,000. And that is to be devoted to makers, to artists who make things, not fine art painters. You have to be a maker. It's very specific. She says, the unique award is directed at makers steeped in practice using materials singly or in combination. Here. Such materials might include fired clay or glass, fine or base materials, textiles using any kinds of applications, wood, plastics, paper, or other materials not included in this list, which I quite like, so that's as open as you can get, where the emphasis is based on the transformation of materials through the use of sustained practice towards a series of critical outcomes. And it aims to assist makers to investigate and develop a body of work which would be otherwise unaffordable. And Stuart is the first recipient of that award. And the award is administered by the Arts Council, and they offer £15,000 per year to an individual. And he's the first recipient of it. And when he was here at the opening, one of his comments was, he said he just couldn't get over it when it bounced into his account that it was sitting there. Now, what it means is that you can't use it if you're an undergraduate. You're not applicable. It's not to be for a period of sort of undergraduate study. Postgraduates can apply, but they prefer the recipient to be somebody who has made a presence and a contribution to the artistic practice in Northern Ireland, at least one out of the past 5 years. And certainly he has been working over the past 15 years and is very much established. But what it allows him to do, as he said, is that he's had 10 exhibitions in the past year. It's allowed him to have that sort of confidence of knowing that he doesn't have to perhaps try to teach, which he has been doing up until recently on a part-time basis in the art college, or to really simply rely on his jewellery practice. It gives him that space and that sort of buffer to actually develop his practice. And that is something that most artists don't have the luxury of at all. And it's a wonderful piece of sponsorship that this woman has made. I mean, I certainly don't know what her own practice was like, or whether she exhibited, or can't find anything about that at all. All we know is that because of her contact and having been brought up here, she maintained that contact and wanted to put something back.
Would he have to have applied for that, or the Arts
Yes.
Council looking for arts?
They would have advertised that in 2014, and I don't know who else would have applied at the same time, but it is then administered by some members from the Arts Council and some who have had connections with the University of Ulster, so Terry Aston and Peter Meanley and a number of others. And Peter was here at the opening, and his comment was that there's criteria that obviously the applicant has to meet, and a scoring system. But interestingly, when they actually then looked at coming and everybody they'd interviewed, he was the one that absolutely everybody had given top score to, so that there was no doubt about it. It was a unanimous decision. The second recipient who's just received it is Scott Benfield, and you'll have come across him. He's a glassmaker. We've seen work of his in the engine room, and he also in the spacecraft, and he had two very beautiful pieces in the Academy in the autumn, which are black and white glasses set in sort of cabinets on the wall in one of the small rooms at the far end of the Academy this year. And he's going to use part of his award to have a 6 weeks residency in America at a leading glassworks, looking at techniques which he will then bring back to Randallstown to help develop his work here. So you can use it for that sort of format if you wish. And certainly Stuart's work such as this is then going to be developed and sent on to, I think it's Stockholm, very, very shortly. So it's a really impressive bursary that is going to be rolled out every year. Just for a year, one person, and once you've got it, you cannot reapply, because I was looking at the criteria just to see is that something you could then come back to, but they say no. And you would hope that also that the Arts Council and the Art College Committee will try to spread it, so that the criteria said it could be glass, it could be ceramic, it could be textile in any sense or any sort of work. And you'd hope that, so that they would then be able to come up with a very different approach each time. Though, as you were saying, Robert, yesterday, the gene pool here is not huge. You have to have a connection with Northern Ireland. You don't have to be born in Northern Ireland, but if you have, but you're not, you need to be working here and have had a presence within the past couple of years.
Amanda, is there anything to say that they have to go back to the art college and maybe give a lecture or an exposition on what they've done and what it had meant to them, just to encourage the people who are there to stick
I think
with
that's very important. One of the stipulations of the bursary is that at the end of the year they have to have a public exhibition of work produced during that year. So, and that's what this is. But in addition to that, there is a series of free lectures that Stuart is giving tomorrow. He's in the Void in Derry. On the 30th of January, he is at Portadown at the Millennium Court Arts Centre. Is that right? Mm. He's also in Flowerfield in Port Stewart, I think, in February. And he's also here on, what date? 4th of February. 4th of February. And he's giving a talk here as well. And that is part of it. Whether he is expected to go to the college or not, I don't know.
There's an interview with him in Croft magazine.
Yes.
Giving a most fascinating backstory. He's from Hollywood. He took a degree in economics at university, and his father wanted him to be an accountant.
Very different pathway.
So, there's hope for everybody.
Definitely. And Robert was saying that he's been filmed recently by BBC Northern Ireland.
It's on the art show on the 28th, hopefully.
28th of January on the art show, so you'll see him on that as well. I just think it's a wonderful bursary. I mean, £15,000 is a large sum of money for an artist. Robert was saying yesterday that the average earnings of makers is around about 10,000. And that's, you know, working flat out. And this is in addition to anything that he would still be able to produce through his own sort of commissions and his own practice on a commercial sense. But this allows you to play, to expand, to develop. And artists need to be able to do that. I mean, if you compare it, the Turner Prize started around about 20,000. It's up from that. The MAC, its international prize that it started, was it last year, the year before, is around about, I think, 20. So 15,000, you know, is a sizable amount. Could be a lot more, but to have donated your fortune of over $500,000 purely for the arts is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, well, they would have to, have that invested to get that income each year, and you would have to balance the good years with the bad years. Some years you might make a lot, other years you won't. So, it is a good sum for 500,000.
It certainly is. I mean, Rosie James, whom we don't know much about, kept her connections here apparently. I mean, her father was called, some of you might know, Dr. James Ford Gillis, who was a former principal of the Belfast College of Technology, and he was also instrumental working with others in the formation of the University of Ulster. So that obviously there was that family connection and the connection with the university she wanted to retain. But there are not many such sort of bursaries. The only other one I can think of, off the top of my head, which would be similar, would be the Aliceberger Hammerschlag Award. When Aliceberger Hammerschlag moved from, I think it was Czechoslovakia here with her husband in the 1950s. And when she died in the 1960s, left a sum of money to the Arts Council, and that's for painters. And that's still ongoing. But there are very few like that. But I just think, irrespective of the fact that he's had the funding for 10 exhibitions and development over the years, you can see a really imaginative and experimental eye tied with it's the finesse, I think, and the delicacy and the sophistication of these objects. It's fine arts, it's fine and applied arts, but it also has a sort of an archaeological feel to it as well, in the way that it's being displayed.
What will he do?
It'll travel.
I'm just thinking, the thing I was just thinking about the dusting.
Indeed.
I always think about the dusting. You'd have to be all careful.
You would. My only sort of negative criticism about it is that this is a body of work, this is an installation. And I've seen exhibitions of his where very rarely would you see an individual piece. You normally see them in groupings, because that's his interest, is the groupings and the relationships between them and the spaces between them. But you do wonder that, if you wish to purchase a single object, would it have the same impact as it has as part of a whole?
No.
These are museum pieces in many ways. I'm pretty sure the Ulster Museum has work of his. I think the Arts Council has work of his. He's got work in the Ulster Museum, the University of Ulster, and the Arts Council collections, as well as in private collections. But the calibre of the pieces, you could see it beautifully displayed in a museum. And even one that sort of would sit alongside archaeological pieces, historical pieces.
Does he sell this sort of stuff, or what?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, the things are on the table, as I said.
I'm sure if you made him an offer,
If you
yeah.
I just think they're exquisite, absolutely exquisite, but they are so delicate. And
there's immense love in nature.
How did he bring them here?
Just in boxes, simple as.
And tissue paper and...
A lot of them are far more robust than they look,
Because if you wait until the plant material is as dry as that, it would break.
it would break. So they must have been
Scream and wait for it.
quite possibly. What you have no idea is, sort of the time involved in this. You can see the source material, etc. But I mean, this is 15 years, you know, since he's graduated, so that there is development here, so that he has developed a series of processes. And the whole point of the bursary also is that it's to do with people who manipulate materials, either singly or in combination, and he does all of that.